The autumn leaves crunched under Detective Léonard Sais-tout's feet as he made his way across the grounds of Midleck University. The prestigious campus, nestled in the Massachusetts woods, had an almost ethereal beauty to it, a serene veneer that belied the dark secrets lurking beneath the surface. Sais-tout shivered and pulled his coat tighter against the chill October air. He was a long way from his native Paris, called to this remote corner of America to assist the local police with a baffling murder case. Scarlett Sheridan, the golden girl of Midleck U, had been found dead in her dorm room 2 weeks prior, her throat slit from ear to ear. It was a gruesome scene, made all the more disturbing by the fact that the door had been locked from the inside. A seemingly impossible crime. The lead investigator, Police Chief Jordan Hardy, had been quick to arrest Scarlett's boyfriend Sean Finns and her best friend Madeleine Richards for the murder. Their alibis didn't match up, and rumors swirled that the two had been carrying on an affair behind Scarlett's back. It would have been an open-and-shut case, if not for Sais-tout's uncanny instincts telling him something wasn't right. He had pored over the evidence late into the night, studying crime scene photos and surveillance camera footage. And that's when he spotted it. A figure in a hooded sweatshirt leaving Scarlett's building around 7 a.m. the morning her body was found. The same figure the groundskeeper swore he saw entering the dorm, whom everyone had assumed was Scarlett herself. But the gait was all wrong, the proportions slightly off. Sais-tout was convinced it was someone else entirely, someone staging the scene. Now Sean and Madeleine were free, the investigation back to square one. But Sais-tout was determined to unravel the tangled web of secrets surrounding Scarlett's death, no matter where it led. He had a feeling he was standing at the precipice of something much larger and more sinister than a simple campus love triangle gone wrong. Steeling himself against the cold, Sais-tout pressed on toward the administration building for his meeting with the university president Lilith Anderson. If anyone knew the dark underbelly of Midleck, it would be her. As he walked, Sais-tout mentally reviewed the facts of the case. The night before her murder, Scarlett had gone out to a club in the city with her friend Elena Lares. Elena told police Scarlett seemed on edge and left the club around 6 a.m. with a group of strangers, none of whom had been identified. A few hours later, she was dead. What had happened in those missing hours? Who were the mysterious figures Scarlett left with? Sais-tout was sure the truth lay in the answers to those questions. He was startled from his musings by a sudden movement in the trees beside him. Sais-tout tensed, hand drifting toward his hip where his service pistol usually sat, only to remember he had left it behind in Paris. Cursing himself for letting his guard down, he squinted into the dense foliage. "Who's there?" he called out. "Show yourself." A figure stepped out from behind a large oak. It was a young man, maybe 20 years old, with a backpack slung over one shoulder. His eyes widened when he saw Sais-tout. "Whoa man, chill," the kid said, raising his hands. "I'm just cutting through to get to class."
Sais-tout exhaled, feeling foolish.
"Right, sorry. On edge with everything that's happened." "What's your name?" "Todd. Todd Benson." The kid shifted his weight awkwardly. "Were you like, friends with Scarlett or something? She was in one of my poli-sci classes, but I didn't know her that well." "I'm afraid not."
Sais-tout flashed his badge.
Detective Léonard Sais-tout, assisting the Midleck PD. "Did you happen to see Miss Sheridan the night she died?" Todd blanched. No, I was studying at the library pretty late. Didn't see anything." He glanced at his watch. "Hey, I got a jet. Gonna be late. Good luck with all that, though." Before Sais-tout could reply, Todd shouldered past him and vanished down the path. The detective stared after him, brow furrowed. The kid seemed nervous, his answers just a little too quick and rehearsed. Sais-tout made a mental note to look into Todd Benson further. In his experience, even the most casual interaction could end up being crucial to cracking a case. Putting the odd encounter from his mind for now, Sais-tout resumed his trek. Soon the red brick facade of the admin building loomed ahead. He jogged up the steps and pulled open the heavy oak door, stepping into the silent, echoing foyer. The receptionist looked up as he approached, face pinched in disapproval, as if a French detective was the last thing she wanted to deal with today. "Can I help you?" "Bonjour. I'm here to see President Anderson, Sais-tout said.
Détective Sais-tout.
She's expecting me. The receptionist sighed and picked up the phone. Detective Sais-tout to see you, she said into the receiver, butchering his name. All right. She hung up and turned back to him. She'll see you now. Up the stairs. First door on the left.
Merci.
Sais-tout tipped his hat and made his way up the creaking staircase. He rapped his knuckles twice on the thick wooden door at the top. Come in, called a voice from inside. Sais-tout entered the office to find Lilith Anderson seated behind a huge mahogany desk, framed by bookshelves stretching to the ceiling. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, dressed in a crisp charcoal pantsuit, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Anderson stood and extended a hand as Sais-tout approached. Detective, thank you for coming. Her grip was cool and firm. Please have a seat. Can I get you anything?
Coffee, tea.
No, thank you. Sais-tout lowered himself into the plush leather chair opposite her desk. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me, Madam President. I know this has been a trying few weeks for you and your university. Anderson's lips pressed into a thin line. That's putting it mildly, Detective. Scarlett's death has been a tragedy for the entire Midleck community. The kind of scandal and scrutiny we're under now, let's just say our trustees and alumni are less than pleased. I can imagine, Sais-tout said. I won't take up too much of your time. I just have a few questions about Scarlett and the circumstances surrounding her death. Anything you can tell me would be most helpful. Anderson spread her hands. I'm not sure what more I can give you beyond what I've already told the police. Scarlett was a model student by all accounts, excellent grades, well-liked by her peers and teachers. I struggle to imagine anyone wishing her harm. So you knew her well? Sais-tout asked, taking out a small notepad. Not particularly. We'd met a handful of times at various university functions, scholarship dinners, donor events, that sort of thing. But I try to get to know all of our highest achieving students. And Scarlett was certainly that. She had a very bright future ahead of her. Sais-tout jotted a few notes. What about her personal life? Did you have any sense of tension there with her boyfriend or friends?
Anderson hesitated.
There were some rumors, as I'm sure you've heard, about Scarlett's boyfriend Mr. Finns and her friend Ms. Richards. But you know how students gossip. I put little stock in idle chatter. Of course, Sais-tout replied, though he made another note all the same. Now, are you aware that the night of her death, Scarlett left a club in the city with a group of unknown individuals? The university president's brow furrowed. I had heard that, yes, but I'm afraid I don't have any information as to who they might have been. Presumably no one associated with the school, or they'd have come forward by now. That's my thinking as well, Sais-tout said. Which begs the question, what was a young woman like Scarlett, so focused on her studies and reputation, doing gallivanting around town with potentially unsavory characters? It seems out of character from what I know of her. Agreed, Anderson said, worrying her bottom lip between her teeth. She seemed to be debating something internally. Finally, she sighed. Detective, I'm going to share something with you, but it absolutely cannot leave this room. The reputation of Midleck University has taken enough of a hit already. Breathe a word of this to the press and there will be hell to pay. Sais-tout leaned forward in his seat. You have my word, Madam President. What is it? Anderson took a deep breath. A few weeks before Scarlett's death, she came to me in confidence. She was quite distraught, claimed that someone was threatening her, that she'd stumbled onto something nefarious and was in fear for her safety. Did she give any specifics as to the nature of this threat, or what she might have uncovered? No, that's just it. She was maddeningly vague about the whole thing. Simply said that powerful, dangerous people had reason to want her silenced. I pressed her for more details, but she clammed up, said she'd already said too much, that she needed to be careful. Sais-tout digested this, mind racing. If what Anderson said was true, it shed Scarlett's murder in a whole new light. This was no simple crime of passion. She had been deliberately silenced by some conspiracy, her secrets buried with her. Did you report this to the authorities when she came to you? He asked. Anderson looked away, suddenly fascinated by something outside the window.
No.
At the time I thought, well, I assumed she was being a tad dramatic, to be frank. You know how 19-year-olds can be. Assured her that she was perfectly safe here at Midleck, that no one would dare threaten a student. Maybe if I had taken her more seriously. She trailed off, swallowing hard. Sais-tout felt a pang of sympathy for the woman. The weight of a young girl's death was a heavy burden to bear. You mustn't blame yourself, Madam President. There's nothing to indicate you could have prevented what happened. But I do think this information could be highly relevant to my investigation. Would you be willing to give an official statement to that effect? Anderson hesitated a long moment before nodding slowly. Yes, of course. Anything to help get to the bottom of this awful business. Thank you, Sais-tout said, standing and reaching across the desk to shake her hand once more. I will be exceedingly discreet, I assure you. With any luck, your cooperation will help bring Scarlett's killer to justice. Madeleine Richards looked about 15 years older than her 21 years, washed out and hollow-eyed when Sais-tout went to question her later that afternoon. He supposed that tended to happen when you'd been locked up in county for 2 weeks on suspicion of murdering your best friend. She folded her arms tight across her chest as Sais-tout walked into the makeshift interrogation room the Midleck PD had thrown together. Really just an unused office with a flimsy card table and folding chairs. So you're the hotshot detective they brought in, huh? Come to grill me again. Sais-tout raised a placating hand as he took a seat across from her.
Au contraire, Mademoiselle Richard.
I'm here because I believe you are innocent, and I need your help to prove it. Madeleine snorted and rolled her eyes. Yeah, because the cops have been super interested in anything I have to say so far. All they cared about was coming up with reasons to pin it on me and Shaun. She gave a humorless laugh. Guess banging your girlfriend's boyfriend makes you killer material. I do not believe you and Monsieur Finns are responsible for this, Sais-tout reiterated gently. The evidence simply doesn't support it, now that new details have come to light. But I think you know more about what happened to Scarlett than you've let on. And I need you to be fully honest with me if we're to get to the truth. The young woman chewed her lip, gaze cast downward. I want to help, okay? Scarlett was my best friend. Has been since we were 7 years old. But I'm scared. Whoever did this, they're still out there. And if they find out I'm talking, I will protect you, Sais-tout assured. But Scarlett deserves justice, and you're the best chance we have at getting it for her. So please, tell me what you know. Madeleine closed her eyes and exhaled shakily. Okay. A couple months ago, Scar started acting weird, secretive. She'd disappear for hours, not answering her phone. When I asked where she'd been, she'd changed the subject. The girl twisted her hands in her lap. Then I started noticing how jumpy she was, looking over her shoulder all the time. She even thought someone had been in our room, going through her things. I told her she was being paranoid, but I don't know, maybe she wasn't.
Sais-tout nodded, scribbling furiously.
Did she ever confide in you what she was mixed up in? Say anything about being threatened? No, that's the thing. Scar told me everything. We didn't have secrets, not since forever. So her clamming up like this? I knew it had to be bad. Madeleine shook her head. I tried to get it out of her, but she just kept saying she couldn't tell me, that she had to handle it herself, that it was too dangerous. The detective felt a flutter of excitement in his chest. Lilith Anderson's story about Scarlett's mysterious fears, confirmed by her closest confidant. They were on to something here, he could feel it. What about the night she died? He pressed. Did anything strange happen? Did you notice her interacting with anyone unusual at the club? Madeleine thought for a moment. No, not really. I mean, not until those people showed up at the end of the night. The ones Elena saw her leave with.
Sais-tout s'abstraitèrent.
Did you see them as well? Yeah, I got a look at them. 2 guys and a girl, probably mid-20s. I'd never seen them before, and we knew, like, everyone at Midleck. They definitely weren't students. Can you describe them? Anything you remember could be important. Madeleine closed her eyes, brow furrowed in concentration. The girl had really long dark hair.
Tan skin.
One of the guys had a tattoo on his neck, I think. Some kind of symbol. She shook her head. I'm sorry, it's all kind of a blur. I'd had a lot to drink by then. Sais-tout waved off her apology. You've been very helpful, Mademoiselle Richards. I know this isn't easy. Just one more question. Did you happen to notice what Scarlett was wearing when she left? Yeah, it was that blue off-the-shoulder top she always wore when we went out. You know, the sparkly one. And a black mini skirt. The detective felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. If Scarlett had been found in her pajamas, someone had taken the time to redress her after killing her. Just as he suspected, the scene had been carefully staged. But why take such a risk? He needed to take a closer look at those crime scene photos, see if any other clues jumped out with this new context. Merci beaucoup, Madeleine, Sais-tout said, rising to his feet. You may very well have just given me the piece I need to break this case wide open. I promise you, I will not rest until Scarlett's real killer is brought to justice. Madeleine gave him a watery smile. Thank you, detective. It's nice to feel like someone actually gives a crap. You know? Sais-tout returned the smile, hoping his conviction showed on his face, because it was quickly becoming clear that this was no ordinary murder. Scarlett Sheridan had stumbled onto something big, something that had cost her her life, and now it was up to him to finish what she'd started, before any more blood could be spilled in the shadows of Midleck University. The sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise by the time Sais-tout left the police station, deep purples and sickly yellows churning on the horizon. A storm was brewing in more ways than one. He drove back to his small rented room near campus, thoughts still consumed by Madeleine's revelations. A visit to the club where Scarlett spent her last night seemed in order. Sais-tout wanted to question the staff, see if any of them remembered the mystery trio Madeleine described. A long shot perhaps, but he'd cracked cases on flimsier leads. Stripping off his rumpled suit, Sais-tout climbed into the shower, letting the hot spray melt some of the tension from his shoulders. Bit by bit, a picture was starting to emerge, fragments and shards of the sordid truth piecing together in his mind. Scarlett, bright and ambitious, catching wind of something corrupt, something dangerous. A shadowy cabal with influence reaching to the highest echelons of Midleck. Powerful people with dark secrets to keep buried. Had her conscience compelled her to dig deeper, to find proof to expose their crimes? And when they discovered her snooping, did they lure her out that night to permanently silence the threat? Toweling off, Sais-tout threw on a clean shirt and trousers. He needed to tug on this thread, see how far it unraveled. Grabbing his coat, he headed out into the purple-black night. The club, pretentiously named Aubergine, throbbed with bass and flashing neon as Sais-tout pushed through the crowded entrance. Scantily clad bodies writhed on the dance floor to a pounding electronic beat. He shouldered his way to the bar, catching the eye of the bartender, a gaunt man with greasy hair. "What can I get you?" he asked over the din. "Information," Sais-tout said, flashing his badge. "I'm investigating the murder of Scarlett Sheridan. She was here 2 weeks ago, the Saturday night before she died. Do you remember her?" The bartender squinted at him, absently drying a glass with a rag. "Hard to say, man. We get a lot of college kids in here. Faces start to blur together." Sais-tout slid a 20 across the bar top. "How about now? Jog your memory at all?" Pocketing the bill, the man huffed a laugh. "All right, yeah, I think I remember her. Little redhead, right? She's in here a lot. Usually with that other chick, the tall brunette. Madeleine Richards, yes. But that night Scarlett left with some other people." Sais-tout pulled out his notepad, flipping it open. 2 men and a woman, looked to be a bit older than the typical crowd here. "Sound familiar?" The bartender scratched his stubbled chin. "You know what, I think I do remember them. Definitely not regulars, stood out. The chick was hot as hell, and the dudes looked like money, you know? Not the usual broke-ass college clientele. Any other details you can recall?"
C'est-tout précède.
"What were they wearing? What did they order? Did you overhear any of their conversation?" "I don't know, man. I serve a lot of drinks." Alls I can say is they were whispering all serious in the corner booth most of the night. Then they took off with your girl around last call. Did you notice anything off about Scarlett? Did she seem distressed at all? Maybe frightened of these people? The bartender shrugged. Honestly, she seemed pretty wasted. Could barely walk on her own. The one guy had to, carry her out to the car. I figured he was her boyfriend or something.
C'est-tout frowned, scribbling furiously.
Had Scarlett been drugged to get her out of the club? The timeline of that night grew murkier with each new revelation. One last thing, the detective said, reaching into his coat for a folded piece of paper. The woman with them, Madeleine, said she had a distinctive tattoo on her neck. Some kind of symbol. Does this look familiar? He held up a rough sketch he'd made based on Madeleine's description. The bartender squinted at it, eyes widening in recognition. Yeah, that's it. I knew I'd seen that somewhere before. Fucking weird tattoo for a chick, right? Sais-tout's heart began to race. Can you tell me anything else about it? What it means, or where you might have seen it before? The man shook his head. Nah, sorry. Just remember thinking it was strange. Kinda sinister looking. Sais-tout sighed, tucking the sketch back into his pocket. It wasn't much, but it was something to go on at least. He'd have the local PD run the symbol through their database, see if anything pinged. With any luck, it could lead them to identifying Scarlett's mysterious companions that night. Merci, you've been very helpful, he said, sliding another 20 to the bartender. If you think of anything else, here's my card. Don't hesitate to call, day or night. Stepping back out into the now pouring rain, Sais-tout hunched his shoulders against the icy onslaught. He had a feeling it was going to be another long night poring over the scant breadcrumbs this case had strewn. Perhaps it was time to take a closer look at the Sheridan family as well. If their daughter was embroiled in something as precarious as he feared, surely they'd know more than they'd let on thus far. As the rain pelted against his skin, a grim determination settled over the detective. No matter how deep this conspiracy went, no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against him, he would not rest until he'd unmasked the truth. For Scarlett, and for all the innocents of Midleck University, he would follow this twisting path into the heart of darkness itself. And heaven help anyone who stood in his way. The next morning dawned bleak and gray, the storm having blown itself out sometime before sunrise. Sais-tout sat hunched over the rickety desk in his rented room, sifting through a stack of police reports and campus records. His eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep, his head pounding dully behind them. But the work could not wait. He had a killer to catch. A knock startled him from his focus. Frowning, Sais-tout rose and crossed to the door, opening it a crack. He blinked in surprise at the disheveled figure standing in the hallway. "Bonjour, Monsieur Fins," he said. "This is unexpected." Shaun Fins looked like he hadn't slept in days, eyes bloodshot and hair sticking up at wild angles. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly agitated. "Can I come in?" he asked, gaze darting up and down the empty hall. "It's important." Sais-tout stepped back, allowing the young man to slip past him into the cramped room. He shut the door firmly and turned to face Scarlett's boyfriend. "What can I do for you?" Fins paced in tight circles, gnawing on a fingernail. "I wasn't totally straight with you before," he said finally, voice tight. "About that night. There's some stuff I left out." "I'm listening," Sais-tout said, crossing his arms over his chest. Taking a deep breath, Fins sank onto the edge of the sagging bed. "Scarlett called me that night really late, like 3 in the morning. She was freaking out, crying. Said she needed my help." He raked a hand through his hair. "When I got to her, she was totally incoherent. Kept babbling about a thumb drive, how she needed to get it somewhere safe. That they'd be coming for her." Sais-tout felt an electric jolt run down his spine. "A thumb drive? Did she say what was on it?" "No, just that it was her insurance, in case anything happened to her. I told her she wasn't making any sense, but she made me swear to find it if..." Fins faltered, a tremor running through him. "If she disappeared."
Merde, c'est tout bretted.
Monsieur Fins, this is vital. Do you have any idea where the drive might be? Did Scarlett give you any clues? The boy squeezed his eyes shut, fingers twisting in the bedspread. She said to look where we first met, that it would be there. The detective nearly vibrated out of his skin. The missing piece, the evidence Scarlett died trying to protect. It had to be on that drive. Where did you and Scarlett meet? The campus coffee shop, Finn said. I spilled a latte on her notes the first week of freshman year, offered to buy her a new one, gave her my number. A wobbly smile touched his mouth at the memory. There and gone. Then that's where we start, Sais-tout said, already shrugging on his coat. You're certain she never mentioned the thumb drive to you before that night? Finn shook his head.
No, isuya.
I don't know what kind of stuff she was into, but it was bad. Like, really bad. A shudder rolled through him. You gotta find out who did this, detective. Scarlett, she didn't deserve this. Any of it.
Je sais, Sais-tout murmure.
I promise you, I will not stop until justice is served. For Scarlett and for you. You have my word. He clapped a hand on Finn's shoulder, feeling the tremors racking the boy's thin frame. Grief and terror, a potent combo. With a final nod, Sais-tout swept from the room, long legs eating up the distance to the stairs. If his suspicions were correct, the thumb drive contained enough dirt to topple Midleck's rotten core like a house of cards. It could also paint a glowing target on his own back. But that was a risk he had to take. Let the corrupt power players of this university try to strong-arm him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Léonard Sais-tout always got his man. And this time would be no different. The busy bean was just opening up as Sais-tout came striding across the leaf-strewn quad, the scent of dark roast and pumpkin spice wafting enticingly from its orange doors. A bored-looking barista glanced up as he entered, stifling a yawn. Morning, she said. What can I get started for you? Something of a special order, Sais-tout replied, holding up his badge. Detective Sais-tout, investigating the murder of Scarlett Sheridan. I have reason to believe she may have left an item hidden here. Would you mind if I take a look around? The girl's eyes went wide as saucers. Oh, sure, I guess. I don't think I'm supposed to let you, disrupt business or anything though. This will only take a moment, he assured her. And it is a matter of utmost urgency. Lives could very well be at stake, right? Okay, do what you gotta do, I suppose. She waved a vague hand at the seating area. Just holler if you need something. Wasting no time, Sais-tout began a meticulous sweep of the coffee shop's interior. He checked behind cushions, under tables, even inside the battered old piano shoved against the back wall. Nothing. Growing increasingly frustrated, he was about to admit defeat when a thought occurred to him. The condiment bar. Finn had said they met when he spilled coffee on Scarlett. It would be the first place she'd have gone to clean herself up. And the tiny, half-hidden shelf below the counter. Heart pounding, Sais-tout crossed to the station and crouched down, running a careful hand along the underside of the shelf. His fingers brushed a small, rectangular object taped to the wood, nearly invisible if you weren't looking for it. Bingo! Pulse roaring in his ears, Sais-tout worked the drive free and slipped it into his coat pocket. He rose on shaky knees, aiming for an unaffected air as he nodded to the barista.
Merci.
You've been most helpful. Outside, the wind whipped dead leaves into swirling eddies, their dry rattle sounding like old bones. Sais-tout turned up his collar and struck off across the brightening grounds, hand drifting unconsciously to the slight weight over his heart. The pieces were falling into place now. He only prayed he had the strength to see this sordid saga through to its conclusion. Sais-tout glowered at the innocuous black thumb drive resting on his desk, a taunting mark against the scuffed wood. As expected, the files it contained were heavily encrypted, far beyond his own ability to crack. He needed an expert, someone who could break the drive's defenses and lay bare its secrets without tipping off the powers that be. His mind drifted to the twitchy kid from the other day. Todd Benson, was it? The IT major who seemed to know more than he let on. It was a gamble, but his options were running thin. firing off an email to the contact listed in the campus directory. Sais-tout leaned back in his chair, massaging his throbbing temples. Bit by bit, an insidious rot was revealing itself at the core of this venerated institution, a decay of the soul as much as the flesh, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd only begun to scratch the surface. A chime jolted him from his reverie. Todd had responded, agreeing to a clandestine meeting in the anthropology building's basement lab. Sais-tout checked his watch. After midnight, when the facility would be all but abandoned. The kid was slyer than he looked. Pocketing the drive, Sais-tout snagged his coat and headed out into the chill night. He resisted the urge to glance over his shoulder, to scan the shadows pooling beneath the elms and oaks for signs of pursuit. They were watching him now, he was certain of it, waiting for him to lead them straight to the prize. The anthropology department loomed ahead, its Gothic spires and arched windows giving it the look of a sepulchre. How fitting, Sais-tout mused grimly, slipping through a side entrance. The tomb of Midleck's darkest secrets, buried 6 feet deep. Todd was waiting for him next to a buzzing server bank, leg bouncing a mile a minute. His eyes flicked up as Sais-tout approached, then widened at the sight of the detective's badge. "Shit, I didn't know you were a cop," he hissed. "What the fuck, man?" Sais-tout held up a calming hand. "Relax, Monsieur Benson. I asked you here because I require your particular set of skills and the utmost discretion. This is about Scarlett, isn't it?" Todd asked, shoulders hunching. "Look, whatever she was into, I don't want any part of it. I've got enough trouble without getting wrapped up in some insane Nancy Drew shit. Believe me, the last thing I want is to endanger more lives," Sais-tout said. "But Scarlett was murdered for what she discovered. The truth dies with her, unless we uncover what's on this drive." He withdrew the slim black device, holding it out to the trembling youth.
S'il vous plaît.
"You may well be my only hope to expose the infection poisoning this campus." Todd bit his lip, gaze bouncing between Sais-tout's face and the drive. After a long, tense moment, he exhaled noisily and snatched it from the detective's grasp.
Christ, fine.
"But if I get fucking murdered too, I'm so haunting your ass." Sais-tout couldn't help a small smile. "A risk I am willing to take." It took the better part of an hour, Todd's fingers flying over the keys as he muttered strings of nonsensical jargon. But at last, he gave a crow of triumph, spinning the laptop around.
Et voilà.
"Let's see what all the fuss is about." Sais-tout scrolled through screen after screen of damning text, each new revelation sending a fresh chill down his spine. Confidential emails, offshore account statements, internal memos. It was all there, irrefutable proof of what he'd begun to suspect. Dean Lilith Anderson's assurances to the contrary, this went all the way to the top. Blackmail, extortion, misappropriation of school funds, even whispers of connections to the mayor's office and state judicial system. A vast web of corruption and deceit, a shadow government embedded in the very foundations of Midleck University. No wonder they'd silenced her so swiftly, so brutally. She'd held the keys to their kingdom of sin, and it had sealed her fate. Sais-tout felt bile rising in the back of his throat. The depth of the rot astounded him, a perversion of everything an institute of higher learning was meant to stand for. Greed and power, the oldest vices known to man. He turned to Todd, jaw tight. "Can you make a copy of the drive's contents? I have a feeling the original is about to conveniently disappear." The younger man nodded shakily, already pulling out a fresh thumb drive.
Yeah, no problem.
"But what are you gonna do with it? I mean, these people, they're not gonna just let you waltz in and arrest them."
Tout à fait. Sais-tout agreed grimly.
"We'll have to be very careful how we proceed. Take the information to the State Attorney General's office, perhaps, or straight to the press. Public outrage may be our best chance at a proper reckoning." He ran a hand over his stubbled chin, mental gears turning. "But first, I think it's time for Dean Anderson and I to have a proper chat. Clear the air, as it were." Todd shot him an incredulous look. "Dude, are you insane? You just said how dangerous these people are. They offed Scarlett without batting an eye. What's to keep them from doing the same to you? There's more than one way to confront a suspect, Sais-tout replied with a thin smile. Don't worry. I have no intention of simply blundering in like some amateur gendarme. The next morning found him once again climbing the steps of the austere administration building, a loaded Sig Sauer P226 concealed in a shoulder holster beneath his coat. Todd had balked at the idea of Sais-tout going in alone, but the detective knew this was a dance best done without an audience. Anderson's secretary barely glanced up as he blew past her, barging into the dean's office without so much as a "by your leave." The imperious woman glared daggers at him over a towering stack of paperwork. "Detective Sais-tout," she bit out, "I don't recall having you on my schedule today." "Pardonnez-moi, Madame Anderson," he replied with an icy smile, "but I think we're a bit past appointments at this stage." Her eyes narrowed to slits, flinty and cold. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. If you have questions pertaining to your investigation dash..." "Oh, I have questions," Sais-tout cut in, stalking closer. "So many questions. About Scarlett Sheridan. About just what she discovered that led to her brutal demise." He leaned over the wide desk, palms flat against the gleaming mahogany. "But more than that, I have answers. The kind of answers that could bring this whole rotten institution crashing down around your ears." Anderson's nostrils flared, spots of color burning high on her cheeks. But to her credit, she didn't so much as flinch. "I'm afraid I haven't the faintest idea what you're babbling about," she snapped. "But I won't sit here and be subjected to baseless accusations and thinly veiled threats. I think it's time for you to go, detective." She reached for her phone, no doubt to summon security, but Sais-tout slapped a staying hand over hers. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said softly. "At least, not before you've had a chance to review the contents of this." With his free hand, he withdrew a copy of the thumb drive, setting it almost gently on the desk between them. Anderson stared at it as if he'd dropped a live grenade in her lap. "Where did you get that?" she rasped, composure cracking. "From a very brave young woman," Sais-tout replied solemnly. "One who gave her life to expose the truth, to bring justice to the innocents you and your cronies have victimized in the name of power and greed." He straightened, tugging at his cuffs. "Of course, I have no way of knowing if you were directly involved in Scarlett's murder. Perhaps you're merely a cog in the machine, turning a blind eye to keep the gears grinding. But one way or another, you will answer for your part in all of this." Anderson stared at him, a myriad of emotions flickering across her aristocratic features. Fear, anger, resignation. When she finally spoke, her voice was leaden. "What is it you want, detective?" Sais-tout allowed himself a humorless smile. "Want? Justice, Madame Anderson. For Scarlett Sheridan. For every student who's been used as a pawn in your sordid games." He leaned in again, holding her gaze. "What I want is for you sing like a canary. Names, dates, crimes. All of it. Lay your filthy secrets bare, and I'll do what I can to mitigate the damage." A long, charged silence stretched between them, broken only by the dean's ragged breathing. At last, she seemed to crumple in on herself, a puppet with cut strings. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into," she said hollowly. "The people involved, they'll bury you, bury us all.
Ils peuvent essayer, Sais-tout replié Wiz à Gallic-Schrug.
But they'll soon find I'm not so easily interred." And with that, he turned on his heel and strode from the room, leaving Lilith Anderson to contemplate her sins in the gathering dark. The story broke like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves rippling across the country. Every major news outlet from the New York Times to CNN ran with it, each salacious detail devoured by a voracious public. Arrests quickly followed, the Midleck University administration toppling like a row of rotten dominoes. Dean Anderson was the first to fall, agreeing to turn state's evidence in exchange for a lenient sentence. The others, including Mayor Richards and several prominent judges, dug in their heels, lawyering up and loudly proclaiming their innocence. But the proof of their guilt was ironclad, and one by one, the tarnished pillars of the community were dragged out in chains. Students and faculty watched in shock as their once revered leaders were revealed as little more than common criminals. The ivory tower of Midleck U forever stained by their misdeeds. Through it all, Léonard Sais-tout remained at the center of the storm, unflappable as ever in his pursuit of the truth. In his final meeting with State Attorney General, he was asked what he planned to do next, now that the case of a lifetime had reached its denouement. The Frenchman merely smiled, a glint of steel in his eyes. "The same thing I always do, monsieur. Follow the evidence, no matter where it leads. For a mind like mine, there will always be puzzles to solve, mysteries to unravel." He glanced out the window, to where the first tender shoots of spring were beginning to peek through the loamy earth. A time of rebirth, of new beginnings rising from the ashes of tragedy. "There is rot in the world," Sais-tout said softly, "but there is also the promise of redemption, of justice, if we are only brave enough to seek it out." He turned back to the AG, a wry twist to his lips. "And as our dear Scarlett proved with her dying breath, the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter the cost." With that, Léonard Sais-tout shook the man's hand and took his leave, footsteps echoing down the marbled corridor. He had a plane to catch back to Paris, and no doubt a mountain of paperwork waiting for his attention. But the detective knew he would remember his time at Midleck for the rest of his days. The darkness he'd confronted, the light he'd helped to shine, if only for a moment. For in the end, that was all any of them could do. Stand tall against the encroaching shadows, and pray they had the strength to see the dawn. It was a burden Sais-tout would gladly shoulder, until the very last beat of his weary heart. A final quote, scrawled in the detective's signature inscrutable handwriting.
Au milieu de l'hiver, j'apprenais enfin qu'il y avait en moi un été invincible.
Albert Camus.